Hello, dear colleagues. Today we continue our course IT Technologies and eHealth. My name is Konstantin Koshichkin. I am Associate Professor of the Digital Health Institute in Moscow Sechenov University. And today we will talk about application of Internet technologies in medicine, and we'll cover several relevant questions to this area. Basically, we will talk about data protection, personal information security, because these areas are the basis and infrastructure of all technologies applied with internet in healthcare. So if we are unable to provide secure means to our services, it will be impossible to use them in healthcare. Information security system is a set of organizational and technical measures aimed at ensuring the information security of the organization. And the main objective of protection is data that is processed in the organization, and in multiple cases it will be processing with different automation systems. What are the major threats to secure data storage and exchange in healthcare? First of all, it will be data theft, using untested software, hacker attacks, spam, negligence, technical glitches, equipment theft, and so on. To create a protection system for information, we will need to have all required policies in the company. We will need to implement technical software solutions for this system, and implement all these measures inside the organization. What are the steps in introduction of information security policy? It will be development of the all required documents, identification of potential threats for information, dividing these threats into several groups, compilation of all data being stored and classifying this data, establishing a responsible person or unit in the organization for the data protection, and identification of the main directions of information security to be done. There are numerous standards worldwide in data protection area. They will cover objectives of information protection, so it will be general information technologies, standards for data structuring, requirements, definitions, how security systems should be assessed, what are the effectiveness criteria, and so on. Talking about data security, we are talking on solutions which cover several layers of activities. It is so-called approach for defense in depth, so we have multiple layers of security systems. To develop such a system in organization, there are a lot of work which must be done. First of all, it's classification and determination of the degree of criticality of resources which we are going to protect. It's analysis of risks associated with this secure information, selection of the adequate methods and ways to protect this data, introduction of information system. It's of course comparison of different solutions to make it possible to introduce in this environment. Development and monitoring of implementations, plans, procedures, regulations, etc. Administration of those tools and maintenance of them in future. Identification of possible channels of information leak. Carrying out preventive measures to prevent violations of information security, conducting preliminary tests, organization of information system, certification, monitoring of external sources on information, ensuring confidentiality, and securing restricted information. This approach, protection in depth, could be divided in 7 different layers. First of all, it will be regulations, so it's called law and other documents which are created to ensure data protection. Next layer will be physical protection. Next one, perimeter of the organization. So these 2 layers are about physical access to the organization, and it's not information technology. And I mean, maybe involvement of IT technologies are quite low on these levels. Next one will be internal network. Next is our servers, computers, and hardware. Then we have applications, our software products, and on the last level it will be information or data itself. There are different ways how this information could be classified. The most simple one is confidential information or private information that requires the highest degree of protection. Disclosure of such information leads to significant damage to the company, so it's what we are going to protect. Sensitive information, it's will require less secure storage, and this is information which, if it will be disclosed, it could cause some harm to the company. And public information, which could be available openly to the global public. Talking about confidential data, there will be classifications also. On the highest level, it will be state secret. Disclosure of this type of information could harm state interests. Confidential information, it will be on the level of the company. And public information, which do not require protection. When we are talking about data protection, there is a vast area of risk management related to this question. And talking about risk management, there are several activities which could be done with this risk. First of all, we need to identify which risk do we have related to this information system or process or data, and how we can mitigate this risk. If it's not possible, we could think about transfer of these risks, so they will be not on our own response, but on the third party. For example, hire a contractor who will provide data security for you. Risk acceptance is when what is possible to be done is already done, and we need to accept this level of risk. Risk compensation is a simple reduction of probability or intensiveness of this risk to appear. Risk aversion is about when we can do something so this risk will not be relevant for us anymore. And of course there will be risks which are out of our limits, and we're not able to do something with this risk, so it will be ignored. The simplest way for data security is adequate password management procedures, and it need to be at least 8 characters long. There should be no names in them, or dates, or some numbers of cars, or something like that. So it shouldn't be something simple, which could be easily found in most common passwords lists in the internet for brute force attack. And In the most cases, regularity of password update should be at least 90 days, and if we're talking about privileged users with a high access rights, it should be done even more frequent. If there are any possibility that this password was compromised, you should immediately change it, and if you need to create some kind of automation script or something like that, you shouldn't store the password in the body of the script. It should be some kind of external service to provide these credentials to the script. Talking about our users, there are also several ways how we could improve our data security. First of all, it will be using of licensed software and keeping the network in the required state of security. Of course, in many cases, breaches in security are related to users' actions, so they could be avoided by raising awareness, what could be done with no risk for data loss and which actions should be avoided. This awareness should be regularly controlled and tested. Other measures will be monitoring of the status in information systems, management of user passwords, integrity monitoring and security analysis, active audits, performance monitoring, external sources of information monitoring, security audits, which should be done regularly, external security audits, which is quite the same, but with external body who will be providing it. All attempts for unauthorized access should be identified and analyzed. And of course, each security breach should have adequate response for it. What are the stages for data protection? We will take a look as an example on Antivirus Software, which is able to provide several actions for information security. And first of all, this software will have cloud knowledge base gathering all the data on existing viruses and malware, and keeping this database will allow the system to find relevant software on your computer and in your network. Of course, there are several patterns for behavior of such a software, and components which allow this software to analyze behavior of other software products and scripts could provide insights if this software is harmful or not. Some of the resources in the system could be marked as protected, and this software product will keep higher level of attention if some third-party script or software is trying to have an access to this data, and you can also restrict access for all the software products in the system to the selected part of information. Real-time protection allows to scan all the actions going on currently in your system, and it's also a way to find malware and preventing harm for you to be done. Of course, you could have blacklists for actions or software products and whitelist. For example, some kind of software tools could have an access for a certain protected data, and for example, it could be some tools which you are using to manage this data, and of course, it should keep access. Also, there are ways to restrict access for external data storages and devices, so it will be impossible to copy data from your storage, for example, to the flash drive or something like that. One of the common solutions to provide protection on the level of data is data encryption, and we will talk a bit more about it later today. And this software tool, which provides data security, also could provide additional data encryption for selected drives, for example. But also the same technology is available in Windows. It is called BitLocker, and you could basically encrypt your hard drive and to store your data secure. This protection could be run not only on your personal computer, but also on server side, so all the data streams will be controlled, and server-based activities also will be controlled. Recently, there were several cases of unwanted encryption of your personal data by malware, when some type of unwanted person will run a script on your computer to encrypt all the data, and after that he will demand some sum of money to provide you key for this encrypted documents, so you will be able to get back your access to them. And this tool could be used to protect you from this unwanted encryption by third party. Also, this tool could provide you additional logging of the changes in your folders and files, so all the unwanted changes will be entered in the specific log, and you could analyze it later. If we are talking about healthcare facility, there always will be a need for centralized control of such tools, so all the workplaces will be in the same level of security and management policies, and such a tool could be run in the server mode with the central control toolkit. Let's talk about cybersecurity in general. Actually, malware appeared quite early in the period of when there was not an internet yet, but ARPANET, and this it was 1988, and it was first recorded computer virus in history. It was spreading between mainframes in this network, and it was more like a worm, and there was a lot of damage from this worm because there were no protection at all against such type of software. Talking about definitions, cybersecurity is the ability of the information management system to successfully perform tasks in the conditions of cyber attacks aimed at causing damage to critical and potentially dangerous objects. So we are talking about protection of critical areas of software. It's based on the term cybernetics or Kubernetics in Greek. It's the science of general law of receiving, storing, transforming, and transmitting information in complex control systems. Who is able to organize this protection? Of course, it will be our staff, persons who are designated for data security and cybersecurity. What are the objects which are being protected? It's subsystems in our environment, it's equipment, data sources, signal sources, and so on. There are several specifics in IT architecture nowadays. It's long distance between software components and physical components. So our networks and internet connect different types, different components of the system together in one common environment. So it's in many cases we're unable to just physically go from one server to another to make some updates. It's a wide variety of communication methods and technologies being used. So we're talking about thousands of different technologies and solutions. Physical access to infrastructure cannot be restricted. In many cases, our wires or even waves of radio channels are not being protected physically from access. System life cycles are quite long, so nowadays we have solutions which were developed several decades ago. And of course, in many cases, we're unable to install updates on such systems because they are outdated and there is no means of providing updates for them. In many cases, we're talking about real-time information processing. Some of the solutions are being run on the level of microprocessors, so it will be area of Internet of Things, which we were covering on the previous lecture. And of course, the main problem in this area is human factor, and most of the threats to the security are related to humans. What are the main threats in information security? It's a possible presence of the hidden functionality in the software and hardware. For example, it could send your protected data to the third party, and you will be quite surprised how many information is being sent by basic web browser when you're looking at something on your laptop. Malware injections into your control systems, it's viruses basically of some kind like that. Physical connection to communication channels, it could be insertion in the lines of communications. Actions of the internal attacker, it's related to the actions of our own employers, for example, when they stole some files from the company or something like that. Unauthorized access is related to some person getting access to the area of the system or website, which shouldn't be allowed for everyone. Passive and active network attacks, exploitation of systems and application of hardware devices. There are a lot of problems with undeclared features of the software. It will be backdoors for unwanted access to your system, for example, or some additional logging on the external server or something like that. So basically, each feature of the system which is not mentioned in documentation and we are not aware of this feature could be dangerous because we are not controlling how it is being used. When we're talking about software maintenance and software lifecycle in general, there are 4 stages when we plan what we're going to do, when we're doing, developing the software, checking how it's working, and using this software. And our cybersecurity need to be managed on each stage of this life cycle. This security should be implemented in design of the software, in development of the components and subsystems of the software product, Now, when we are pairing these subsystems in the whole system, so it should be integrated securely in preparation for commissioning, for running the system, during operation of the system, during maintenance of the system, modernization of it, and of course when we are deciding to finalize use of the system and to migrate for the new one. And of course, we'll have here our layered approach of data security. We'll need to have documentation, authentication requirements, and all the management of vulnerabilities and organizational measures and so on. For example, infrastructure should be broken down into several security zones with different levels of requirements for security. Let's talk about types of information security threats. They could be natural, artificial, and they also divide into randomly appeared and deliberately created. And under natural, we'll have system failures, disabling of the hardware, damage of the property, implementation of unwanted software, virus infection, careless actions, input errors, incompetent use, and unintentional damage of the communication channels. And in deliberate section of this graph, we'll have physical destruction of the system, changes in operating mode, agent infiltration, use of some kind of non-controlled equipment, data interception, theft of media, unauthorized copying, reading residual information, and so on. We could name several basic principles of information security systems. Of course, it should be legal, all its work should be consistent, complex, unified. We should manage this in time, and of course there should be ways to improve this system and regularly to check if it's running in accordance to the current environments and requirements from our business. There should be persons who are personally responsible for the actions in the system. And of course, to provide all these principles, we need the system to be flexible, changeable, and updatable, so it will meet requirements of the current day. What are the main types of unauthorized influence which could be done to the information? Of course, it will be modification of the information, destruction, distortion, forgery, blocking of the access to the information, and theft of the carrier of this information. Violator in security will be a person who has attempted to perform prohibited operations by mistake, ignorance, or consciously with malicious intent. And these persons could be also divided in internal, our users, staff members, managers, and so on, and external, for example, external developers of the software, competitors, customers, technical staff, and others. There are several ways in which our actions should be organized and what is need to be done in relation to the information. We should organize all the measures required to provide safety, storage, and access to the data. We need to make this data accessible, so when it is needed, it is easily to be accessed. We should keep privacy of this information, so we should have exact lists of users who are able to get access to the private information. And of course, when we're talking of medicine and medical data, it will be a lot of data which should be protected. We should keep this data authentical, so nobody will be able to change it without being recorded as a person who changed it. And of course, basic software and security protection from malicious intents. And it's sad to notice, but it's most common that all the hacks and breaks in intrusions with information are being done with insiders, and only a small part of data violations will be related to the external hacking and external vulnerabilities related to clouds, servers, and software. According to these reports, all attacks could be, and accidents with data could be divided in 4 major parts. It will be malware injections, accidents, errors, and negligence, system crashes, and vulnerabilities, and attacks related to social engineering, and so on. There is a specialized type of programs which could be used to prevent data loss, and they are being called DLP, or data leak or loss protection or prevention, in different interpretations. It's IT solutions that provide identification, tracking, and prevention of unauthorized use, storage, and movement of the restricted data. They will discover data in storage, track its movement, and prevent unauthorized access. For example, what could be done by DLP system? It will be intercept of all user calls to printers, storage devices, network communication channels, including terminal sessions. It will be automation with decision about possibility of data transferring, printing, saving, and so on. It will be storage of the information about transactions which were done, and providing reports to the responsible persons for data security. So we have analyzing and preventing data access before it was done. We will record all the actions during the access, and afterwards we will be able to provide all the records of data access which took place in the certain period. The ways how we control the amount of information which will be possible to transmit with communication channels, it's quite complex, and this system will analyze types of data, types of connection, user rights, and the system will try to find some patterns and analyze is these actions of certain user are common for this user or this type of users, or it is something strange, and in the situation when this is something unusual for this type of user, the system could automatically interrupt this transmission. So this system provides control of access to all interfaces in your system, all communication channels, and there is an agent running on your computer, so it will be possible. All data storages are being scanned in your system. And in cases of violation, these actions could be terminated by the system, and also the system will provide video recording, screenshots, keylogging by user, and it will be analyzed lately by security officer. There are a lot of different components to make it possible. It will be content filtering by keywords, by terminology, dictionaries. It could be morphological analysis of the words. It will be binary signature of different files, analysis of containers, fingerprinting, optical character recognition, and so on. Let's talk about what type of malicious software we're dealing with. In common, malicious software is being called virus, and there are a lot of different types of viruses, and usage of such a software programs with malicious intent is concerned criminal in most of the countries, so it's a criminal action. Talking about classification for malicious software, there will be, of course, viruses, worms which are spreading through the networks, Trojans providing unwanted access to a system to the third party, spyware, it's a software gathering data about you without noting you, logic bombs, archives with malicious components, mail bombs, hacking tools, and other. Computer viruses are the most basic type of malicious software, and the most important part of this type of software is self-replication, and it could have malicious action or not, and in some cases these viruses could be for some period of time just replicating on the multiple systems, and on the certain date they will act with deleting of some files or some other malicious actions, or providing access to a computer, something like that. Types of actions for the viruses are very different, and the most common in them is duplication from one system to another. Talking about classifications, there are several approaches to this. For example, it could be by affected objects, file viruses, boot viruses, scenario viruses, macro viruses, and so on. File viruses are divided by mechanism of infection. Parasitic viruses add themselves to the executable files, overwriting, irreparably spoiling the infected files. For example, it could be a satellite in some file which is being run on your system, and adding this virus code to other executable files. Classification could be done by operating systems on which this virus is running, technologies using by virus, polymorphic styles viruses, rootkits, and so on. By programming language, for example, low-level assembler viruses, high-level programming languages viruses, and so on. And viruses could have additional malicious functionality in them, backdoors, keylogging, spies, botnets, and so on. Also, we need to mention that in classification we should have how this virus is destructive or not, and it will be harmless viruses, non-dangerous, dangerous, very dangerous, and so on. Macroviruses are programs in languages built into some data processing systems, for example, text editors, spreadsheet. For the reproduction, such viruses use the capabilities of micro languages and with their help transfer themselves from one infected file to another. For example, it could be a virus in doc file or Excel file on your computer. So existence of this type of viruses are connected with micro languages built into your software products. Metamorphic viruses also modify their code, but they don't use encryption algorithms. The difference manifests itself in the form of changes with the code of the virus. There are several technologies that allow you to successfully implement this technique. One of the transformation technologies use a metamorphic program is based on inserting and removing garbage inside the code. So it's about how the virus will hide itself in the program. There are a lot of different types of worms which are known for automatically spreading in the network. So there are no actions from user required to this worm to infect the machine. And it's a problem in peer-to-peer networks, data sharing between different systems, for example, common shared folders in some systems. Some products in internet were affected by this type of viruses. Trojan viruses are commonly being used to get access to the certain system by installing some software product with undocumented features in it. These features could be added by third party when they're taking a normal program and adding some part of code which will be providing ways to distort data in your system to get access to it and so on. There are different ways how this data related problems will appear. It could be interception of data, distortion of data, deletion, and other types of compromise of your data security. In some cases, backdoor utilities will be able to get full control of your system and provide this control to the violators. Also, we should name the phishing technique when we have substitute of the normal website, for example, and it will look just the same as a normal website, and it's common when such links for websites are being sent by mail with text getting your attention, for example, that you received on your account some huge sum, and you need to make some actions in this website to return it or to transfer it to your account or something like that. And when you will click by the link in this email, you will arrive on the phishing website, which will record your password, which you will enter there, and it will be one of the ways how your money will be stolen. Another types of malicious software, spyware gathering data about you, and adware providing unwanted advertisement in your system on your computer. Some banners will be added on your desktop, something like that. Rootkit is a hidden type of malicious software that run at the kernel level of your operating system. And the main danger of rootkits is that being introduced into your kernel, rootkits can perform any action and easily bypass all protection systems on your computer. Usually they are being used for remote control of the computer. Zombies are programs for creating a zombie from your computer and designed to inject code in your system. These zombies will be waiting for some signal from a controller to provide access. So this could be a sleeping zombie for a huge period of time, waiting for good opportunity to provide access to your data. In some cases, these infected computers could be organized in botnet when lots of infected computers will be activated and will start sending some messages for external server. It could be in general it is being used for denial of service attacks when amount of packages from the systems will be exceeding capacity of server to manage, and it will stop working. Now we have a new type of malware. It will be mining tools which will infect your computer to use its computational power to mine cryptocurrency and transmit it to the owner of this malicious software. In some cases, these vulnerabilities could be totally out of your control. For example, there was a vulnerability in LTE networks and it was used to steal users' data by hackers. In some cases, this data extraction techniques will be quite sophisticated, and for example, there was spyware making audio devices, for example headphones, to stream data on the certain wavelengths, and this data could be recorded from outside of the room recording facility, for example directed microphone, and it is a real spy work in action. Getting closer to healthcare, there were a lot of cases of security violation in telemedicine services. There was a case of getting access to the patient's data without authorization, and so on. We have quite a list of such a security problems. Let's talk about solutions for data protection. And in the most cases it will be antivirus software, and these programs are designed to find such a malicious software in the system and prevent it from being acting. And Another way is to introduce digital signatures and tokens. These tokens could be used to encrypt data or to make secure tunnels or to get access control for the information. And it's a physical device which is being used in the system to provide you with access to the system. Next one will be a firewall. It's a system which will stand between your internal network and the World Wide Web, and it will allow data exchange only on certain protocols, ports, IP addresses, and so on. Firewalls are being used to provide access to the resources which are needed in the organization. In common, they are integrated with proxy services, and this proxy server will receive requests for data and send it to the external server. In common way, these firewalls are protecting local network from external access, and they will reject any anonymous access to the internal resources. These firewalls could be made on the software level or as devices with hardware components to provide these communication protections. In common, these devices are being used to make secure channels through internet from head office to the branches and field users with laptops. Next type of software products to provide security is vulnerability scanners. There are tools which will scan your network, your computers, to find any vulnerabilities in your system and provide recommendations how you could mitigate them. For example, this tool could be used to scan open ports in your devices, which could be accessed externally, and it will be one by one each host in your system and scan all the open ports in them. Of course, there are tools for monitoring, and they are also very helpful to find some strange or out of line activities in your system and in your environment. For example, if cryptocurrencies will be started to mining on some of the computers, you will see in this monitoring tool exceeding activity in some segments of your network. Big organizations will require joint security management systems to centralize all the activity, aggregate all data and events, and prioritize incidents and manage who will deal with which of them and how. And these systems will provide visualization and additional tools for management in huge departments. Several times today we mentioned about encryption and protection of data in the system, and let's take a look on cryptographic algorithms behind this. To protect information, the following must be ensured: data accessibility, the opportunity to receive and request information services in the acceptable time, data integrity, relevance and consistency of information, its protection from destruction and unauthorized change, and confidentiality, protection against unauthorized access to this information. So cryptographic protection is one of the ways to make confidential data, keep confidential data from unauthorized access, and also these cryptographic tools could be used to make records for state of data, and it will be a way to guarantee its consistency and that it wasn't changed somehow. In history, there were several ways to protect information. Physical protection with restriction of access to the data carrying will be concealing of the fact of the information existence, so it will be hidden, and cryptographic protection when information was converted into the chaotic set of characters. The science of the secret transmission of information that is inaccessible or incomprehensible to outsiders, it occurred and began to evolve at the moment when humanity realized the need to ensure the protection of information. Cryptography is one of the oldest sciences, and its history dates back several thousand years ago. And it was developing through the history, and it was always required. Cryptography is a branch of applied mathematics that studies models, methods, algorithms of the software and hardware for transformation of information, so-called encryption, in order to hide its content, prevent modification or unauthorized use. Cryptography is closely related to various areas of technical disciplines such as mathematics, algebra, probability theory, complexity theory, number theory, computational mathematics, and so on. Cryptographic protection is a protection of data from being used without decryption. A crypto system is a system implemented in software, hardware, or software and hardware, and the system will perform cryptographic transformation of data. Cryptanalysis is a branch of applied mathematics that studies models, methods, and algorithms, how this software and hardware could be applied for data decryption and conversion into plain text. There are two major types of data encryption. Symmetric, when key is being stored, the same key will be stored on the both parts of the system or at the person who will encrypt data and will decrypt this data. So to implement this technology, we will need to exchange this key secretly before we will start data transmission. And asymmetric encryption is based on different keys which are being used. One key will be secret, and it will be used by person who are making encryption, and the second key will be called public key, and it will allow only to decrypt the message created with the secret key. Cryptography also is being used to create data stamps of the information, and the so-called hashing functions providing hash codes to the raw data, and the main feature of these hash codes are that they are unique for the state of information, and we could store this hash code of file to be sure that this file wasn't changed after we made this hash code. There are several most common algorithms for these hash codes, for example, MD5 and SHA, and they are being commonly used in all systems nowadays. And based on this principle, we will have electronic signature, which could be applied on the document, and the electronic signature will allow us to confirm the authorship of the electronic document, and it will allow us to check the absence of distortion of information in the electronic document, its integrity. And to be able to use this digital signature, we will need to make it non-negotiable, so person who signed the document will not be able to say that it's not his signature. And in healthcare, it is quite beneficial for all parties, because paper documents are hard to store. It's difficult to read these documents, and after some period of time they could be damaged, and they could transmit different diseases themselves in quite, for example, pandemic environments. And electronic signature do not need to have any physical media of exchange in place. It could be just a file which was sent by the network, and we will be sure that this signature is authentic. And in major cases, handwritten signature always could be compromised by a third party, by another person, and it's on the other hand, person who signed the document, first of all, if something if situation became that person do not want to sign this document anymore, will say that it's not his signature, and it will be hard to prove that it is not true. And with digital signature, it will be always clear that this document was signed by this exact person. From the technical point of view, electronic signature is an information in electronic form that is attached to electronic document, and this information is always possible to be used to identify person who signs this document. Electronic signature key is a unique sequence of characters designed to create an electronic signature. And electronic signature verification key or public key is a unique sequence of characters uniquely associated with the electronic signature key and designed to verify the authenticity of the electronic signature. How we can make it possible to be sure that this person is owner of this digital signature? It could be done with certification centers. It's a legal entity which will authorize person with his papers or identification documents, and they will assign a certain digital signature to this exact person. There are different types of tools to be used for person identification. It could be some kind of flash drive or smart card or something like that. On the same technology, we have SSL protocol, which is common in internet to for secure exchange of documents. Our systems will be able to make a secure connection, and all the data exchange between the systems will be in encrypted mode. What are the requirements for electronic records and electronic signatures? Electronic record could be a combination of text, graphic, data, audio, and other, so it's just any information which is stored in your computer system. And electronic signature is a set of computer data which will prove the person who signs this electronic document. When we're talking about digital signatures, we will always need to have event log in the system. So there will be a record with information about when this document was signed. So all the actions with digital signatures must be recorded. For electronic records, we have requirements that content of the electronic record should be equivalent to the similar paper version of the document. No unauthorized changes in this document could be made. System access need to be restricted with a password. Event log need to be in place to record all the actions in the system. And the source of data which is being used to create electronic record should be reliable. So, of course, all our records are based on something made previously, and we need to have a trust with this previous records. For personnel, we have several requirements also. It will be training, all required operational procedures need to be in place, and there should be an exact link between certain person and its owner. Talking about electronic signatures, they should be always unique, so each person will have a different digital signature, and this person need to be identified before confirmation of this signature. And in many cases, we need to have a certification for the user signature provided by external body. For example, it could be a government body or some other type of legal body authorized for digital signature provision. All digital signatures should be in at least two components. For example, it could be physical key and code to activate it. There should be an active procedure of administration to prevent unauthorized use of these signatures. Signing of the records could be only possible inside of the authorization sessions. So first of all, user will need to enter the system and only after that sign some documents. And all the signatures, we need to periodically verify all signatures, and there should be tools to revoke invalid signatures. For example, outdated, or when a person leaves the company, his signature shouldn't be able to use anymore. There should be measures to prevent data loss, for example, plans for in case of some violations or troubles, security measures in place, device testing, and so on. Let's talk about authentication and identification of users. In general, these terms are quite close to each other, but identification is a process to name who is this person getting into the system, and authentication is provision of certain level of access rights to this person. Commonly, passwords are being used to provide authentication and identification of users. But there are a lot of problems with them. In many cases, these passwords are not being stored secretly, and users like to exchange their passwords with each other, for example, for one employee to cover for another one or something like that. Entering of these passwords could be easily spied. In some cases, there were attempts and successful attempts to capture password by noting a sound of keyboard of exact person. So it's quite complicated to store this password secretly. And of course, in many cases, passwords could be guessed in brute force solutions. So how we can improve authentication and identification of our users? The most common way right now is to use biometrics, and there is a different ways how this biometrics could be gathered. It could be fingerprints, geometry of face and hand, and so on, and retina and cornea of the eyes, for example. And I guess it's quite familiar for us right now that our mobile phones are using fingerprints or face recognition to authorize access. It is beneficial to have a system for authentication and identification of persons on the state level in the country. For example, in Russia, we have a unified identification and authentication system, which could be used by all other government entities to allow access to the exact person, and all the authorization procedure will be kept in this centralized system. Functions of the system are to identify and authenticate user, identify how this information will be used, authorize access, and users will have a single account in all the systems, starting with local hospital and, for example, tax collection office, and so on. There are several ways of authentication for users. Simplified is only based on email or mobile phone. Standard, which will be proved by scans of the documents, and confirmed, which was confirmed by a certain person in legal authority by visiting, by visit done by you to this authority, and confirmation of your person was done by employee in this authority. Now, it's a quite complicated path of integration of hospital information system with unified authorization system, and it will require to register your hospital information system in the common registry, generate some public case, and provide this case to the authority, keeping this authentication system in place. It will need to implement authorization modules in your system, and after that, connection will be done, and users will be able to enter your system with their unified username and password. So introducing this system will allow us to provide multiple additional services. For example, it will be telemedicine when we are sure that this person is exact that one patient which was visiting this health authority previously. So it's difficult to implement telemedicine service with multiple health organizations working on the legal basis. Now let's talk about data protection from being lost. A backup system is a set of software and hardware that performs the task of creating a copy of data on a medium designed to restore information in its original location in case of damage or destruction. So the simplest way of backupping is making a copy of data. There are a lot of ways how this information could be damaged, and today we previously talked about viruses, malicious software, and actions of third parties, and so on. But these disasters could be natural, and of course, our hardware is being getting older and not always be able to store your data securely. So anyway, we will need to have a backup of information. How this backupping should be organized? We need to have tools to test is backup recoverable. We need to analyze content in this backup, integrate it with different external solutions, for example, cloud solutions. It could be done centrally or another type of storage. Backupping could be done in several ways. It could be a full backup, storing all data gathered in your system. It could be incremental backup or storing only changes. It could be differential backup, which is quite similar with incremental, but also store previously made records. Also, there could be a selective backup, only getting select types of information. Also, we could define online backupping and offline backupping, which will be done when our system is in operation and we need to stop our system before making this backup. Backupping procedures are quite complicated, and we need to plan how it will be done, define time window when our system will be occupied with backupping. We will need to define how this backup will be stored, how it will be tested, and how to extract data from this backup. So best practice in backup is to make audit before creating a backup. We need to make a plan how many backups we will have and where we will store them. And we need to plan recovery procedures for this backup before we start making backups. Of course, there is a possibility for problems with backups. It will be media failure, human factor, infrastructure failure, softwares, and so on. So we always need to have a so-called backup in on some media without any access external systems, and we need to have this backup tested. And how often we will need to create this backup is dependent on the level of how this information is critical for us. There are different benchmarks for backupping tools, recovery time objective, recovery point objectives. It's about how long we're able to wait before this backup will be installed. To verify backups, we could use different ways of checking, and we will need to check, is it complete, is it secure, is it accessible, wasn't it changed during the storage, so on. Talking about recovery, there are different ways, and they are related to the way how we store our information. For example, if it is a virtual host, it could be backed and stored on the environment of this virtualization server, and also we could restore this backup on the other server standing close to our working one. In virtual machines, we have technologies to recover by moving back to the recovery points, and it is also a good way to restore condition of backup. Now let's cover major points of protection of personal data, because when we are talking about medical data, it will be always personal, and there are different types of data which we need to store in secure way. It will be state secrets, trade secrets, insider information, personal data, and lots of other types of information. In the area of personal data, we'll have names of our patients, date of birth, addresses, family status, social status, education, profession, and so on. So all the personal information about them need to be treated in a secure way. Part of personal data will be publicly available. For example, if we have address books or some public available lists of persons, we don't need to protect this information which was already published about them. When we're talking about personal data, there always will be operator of personal data and a subject or a person whose data we are storing. And the operator will be legally obliged to keep it secret and to prevent it from being provided to the wide party, wide public. There is a process of things which we could do with personal data. It will be any action for why we are gathering this data, and we could store it, collect, make some changes in it, and so on. And currently in information systems and IT technologies in general, we have automated processing of personal data. What are the main actions which could be done with personal data? It's dissemination of personal data, provision of personal data. So it is a disclosure of personal data, and there will be blocking of personal data when we restrict access to it, and destruction of personal data when we erase it. And Another actions are anonymization of personal data, so we're able to make it anonymous, so it will be used, for example, in healthcare. It will be data to train some algorithms on to create some scientific papers and so on. What are the principles for personal data processing? The processing of personal data should be limited to the specific predetermined purposes why we gather this data. It's not allowed to combine databases containing personal data and with other types of databases. And we could process only data which is inside of the purpose of data gathering. So if we're able to get more data than we need, we shouldn't use it. And storage of personal data should be carried out in a form that allows to determine the subject of personal data no longer that it's required by purposes of personal data processing. What are the categories of personal data? They will be less restricted on the top and more restricted in the bottom. So we will start with category number 4, anonymized or publicly available personal data. Number 3 will be personal data that allow to identify a subject of personal data. Next one is personal data that allow to identify the subject and obtain information about him, which is related to the next category. And category number 1 will be health status and religious beliefs, political views, nationality, and so on, intimate life, and so on. Also, we consider volumes of this data. Volume on the top, volume 3, will be not more than 1000 subjects. Volume number 2 will be from 1000 to 100,000. And volume number 1 will be starting with 100,000 subjects. And based on this classification, we'll have different classes of personal data. So it will start with class number 4 with low volume and publicly available data, and class number 1 with lots of subjects and restricted information about social data. For each class of personal data, we will have different types of measures that we need to have in place. For example, for less intense classes, we will have just a list of protective measures, and for more strict classes, we'll need to have certified tools to manage this data, and this certification is being done by legal bodies in the country. So what is the process of working with personal data? We'll start with notification of authorized body that we are going to process a certain amount of personal data in automation tool. Then we'll need to make a survey about this data which we are going to collect. Then we need to classify the system according to the volume and class of information. Then we need to build a model of threats to this information and to introduce how these risks will be managed. Next, we will need to design requirements for this system, and we will need to design a personal data protection system by its own. Next, we'll need to implement the system in practice and operation and run it with all safety and protection measures which were listed during the design of the system. Next, we'll need to certify the system and train our employees to work on it. And of course, we need to maintain the system so it will be operated with all the required measures. Certification of such a system is country-specific method, and there are a lot of requirements for documents to be provided to receive this certification, and it's provided by the certain government body that will assess if everything is in place and you are able to process personal data. Common mistakes in personal data management are related to not identifying the ways how this personal data is going to be used, and lacking of persons who are responsible for it, and so on. During the certification, it will be checked if you are meeting all the requirements and you have in place all the ways how this data could be protected. For example, if there is a list of current threats and if the level of protection is determined and are all the measures ensured, and if everything is in place. And when we are talking about internet and healthcare and global healthcare systems, we will have big user personal data, and gathering this data in one database will produce additional source of personal data which could be treated in separate from other processes. Big user data is a set of information about individuals and their behavior that doesn't contain personal data, which doesn't allow, without use of additional information and additional processing, to identify a specific person from whom we got this data. And currently, this big user data is being gathered in internet by most of the web browsers and with lots of social networks and so on. And this data is connected with geolocation, users' behavior, their profiles, and all the information they're receiving in internet. So it will be data provided by users, for example, on social networks. It will be observable data, for example, where this user was, or which sites does he visited, and so on. And additional analytics based on this data. So if we have in this information user ID connection to the information where this user live, cookies, custom analytics data, this data could be treated as personal because combination of these factors will allow us to identify certain person. And there are several methods how this information could be depersonalized, and of course we can just erase name and other unique features of this data. We could introduce random identifiers in this data. This data could be decomposed, mixed, so some parts of this data will be joined with parts of this data from other users. Talking about medical information, we will be working with special category of personal data, and There are several requirements how this data should be additionally protected. The main directions of violations with this information are data leakage, loss of data, unauthorized modification, and access to this data. We need to have several levels or layers of data protection. Physical layer, it's disabling access to the hardware where this is being stored. Network layer, and we also talked about this, it's framework and other components of network protection. Operating system levels, it will be software which we can use to protect our personal data. And database management level, it's a specific tools for databases. How this special data could be protected? There are several stages in this process. We need to have an inventory of all resources in our environment. We need to develop a threat model. We need to develop and identify all organizational and administrative documents which are in place. And next, we'll need to implement information security tools and operate data protection, personal data protection system, and to keep always on monitoring for effectiveness of these procedures. There are a lot of documents which we need to have in place to keep these requirements, to follow these requirements. It is, for example, information security administrator instruction. It will be instructions of the personal data processing managers, regulations of the process for data processing, personal data security statements, notice of personal data processing for patients to agree with, privacy policies, regulations on accounting storaging and destruction of personal data, regulation of the admission of persons to the process of personal data processing, regulations on responding to requests from personal data subjects, regulations on interaction with public authorities in the field of personal data, regulations on backupping of personal data, and consent forms, technical passports, lists of positions, and so on and so on. So it's a very long list with a lot of documents. And now we have a special area of Internet of Things when we have not persons getting personal data, but tools, and there will be a lot of questions of how to control this data from violation and unauthorized access. Also, there is additional risks in telemedicine because companies that are engaged in the development of devices, mobile applications, software, are primarily aimed at capturing the market to obtain maximum economical benefits, and it's not always connected to secure actions, and there will be a lot of possibilities to compromise these systems. And there we have a lack of regulations in this area and control, and lots of software solutions are being used by patients themselves without additional attention to their medical data. And some of the devices are impossible to update, so any threat in firmware will be impossible to fix. So there could be possibility to make access through the manufacturer accounts on these devices. some devices are using cloud infrastructure, and there could be a lack of personal data protection measures in this infrastructure. In many cases, this data exchange is not encrypted in any way, and in other cases, it's impossible to have a certain level of physical security for this data stored on such a device. So, what are the measures that are needed to be done to make this area secure? And it will be, of course, state regulations and standardizations for data exchange and services which are being operated by these devices. Adequate protection for transmission and storage of all personal data collected with the possibility of restricted access, if necessary, depersonalization of the data, minimizing collection of personal information from patient, awareness raising for patients, and additional specified tools. For example, we have a lot of cases of information which was stolen, and for example, we can name very big companies who reported breaches in security and in personal data, and in many cases this data protection violations cover very vast groups of persons, and of course it's a major concern for general public how to minimize these cases and how to create this area to be, how to make this area to be more secure. And when we're talking about financial market, so this could be resulted in loss in finances for our citizens. But when we are talking about healthcare, there will be possibilities to make harm for the health of our patients, and it is much more serious than just some kind of personal data being stolen. So we need to consider these problems very seriously. And on the other hand, we have infrastructure systems gathering lots of data, and in many cases we are not aware that this information is being stored about us, and how this information will be used, and we didn't accept that this information will be stored. Talking about medical data, there is a huge market for stolen data to be exchanged, and in some cases we are talking not only about data exchange, but about criminal actions when authorized persons stole personal data and sell it for their own benefit. And in multiple cases, pharmaceutical companies could be related to such actions, approving them to be done with medical doctors. And it's all for today. Thank you very much for keeping on track, and see you next time.